Councilmember Crane, you're our quorum. Perfect, thank you. Council, I'll call us to order. It is 3:04 on Tuesday, May 13th for our special called budget work session.
Good afternoon. Mayor, I don't know if you have any opening remarks.
No, I don't, because I think some of the information you're going to provide is helpful in context. I will say this, what we've tried to do, especially important for Councilmember-elect Peoples, is this has been a process we started more last budget cycle that allows council members a better snapshot heading into the summer as we understand where our revenue looks. And today, I think, will be a brief conversation, a little bit sobering, some of the information you're going to have in front of you, where our budget projections are going to be, and then allow us to work more closely with city management and the lab and every department head on where we think revenues will be into the next budget cycle. So please ask questions. There's a lot of information here. Our city manager walked through with me yesterday what this looks like. I do think it helps to ask questions along the way rather than waiting because the presentation is so dense. But for clarity, nothing at all is fully baked. This is mainly a conversation around revenues and the way our city management team is working with department heads to prepare for what may be a much tighter fiscal year leading into 2026. So thank you.
That was well said, and as the mayor mentioned, I think the last budget session we had, we talked about a slight reduction looking overall because of where revenues are headed and expenditures and previously made commitments that we had to deal with. And this is, with some of the information, as we get more information, both at the state level and locally from TAD, this becomes a little bit more sobering, as the mayor said. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christiane, and she's going to take the show going forward. We'll be talking a little bit about street maintenance and PAYGO, and then we'll go into the actual revenues and expenditure side of the general fund.
Thank you, Mayor and Jay. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Christiane Simmons, Fort Worth Lab. Does anyone want to pay? I have printed copies somewhere. I'm going to pass out printed copies if anybody wants one. Yes? Okay. Okay. Oh, okay. I'm gonna give you some. I think they must be in the elevator. Okay. Thank you again for joining us at the beginning of a very busy afternoon and evening. Congratulations to each of you on being sworn in again today, and welcome to Council Member-elect Peoples here. So yes, we're here to continue conversations on fiscal year 26 budget. So when we were last together a couple weeks ago, we talked about the process for building the target budget to fiscal year 26 and the long-term forecast with a particular focus on revenue. And we told you at the time we'd have preliminary values like the next day, so we do. So we'll get to hear today about how that's unfolding. Before we do that, we're going to talk about street maintenance funding. We know that's a really important topic to you and to the community. We continuously see that in community survey, and so we thought it'd be helpful to cover that topic early. So I'm going to tee us up and then turn it over to TPW. So in the context of street maintenance, remember that it's funded from PAYGO, or Pay-As-You-Go Capital, which is carved out as a dedicated portion of the tax rate. Thank you. And that's something the city started doing to fund capital maintenance about 10 years ago, and we've done that each year since through the budget process. So in fiscal year 25, of our tax rate of 67.25 cents, 7.25 cents is dedicated to that cash-funded capital maintenance, or what we call PAYGO. And in our current budget, that 7.25 cents generates $84 million in revenue. And that revenue is then used for the departments and initiatives that you see here, with the largest portion going to transportation and public works. So you saw this slide last time, but as a reminder, it's meant to demonstrate, thank you, that additional funding that you appropriated to street maintenance in the fiscal year 25 budget. You'll see that bump there in green that says additional $10.4 million to streets. There are other departments and initiatives funded with PAYGO as well. And then the PAYGO budget at the outset of this year's budget process typically mirrors whatever growth we're projecting in the property tax revenue budget, because again, that's how it's funded, with property tax revenue. So right now in the fiscal year 26 working budget, the PAYGO budget would be growing by 3.5% for each category. Now you'll see later in Brady's revenue presentation that 3.5% number will likely look different, but for now, this is just meant to demonstrate sort of what the regular growth would look like. For TPW, you'll see that 3.5% growth generates about $2.3 million in revenue. So it's not like nothing, but it's, we've historically talked about a larger gap than that for street maintenance. So with that context as a reminder just about PAYGO in general and that's the funding source for street maintenance, I'm going to invite Lauren Prier and Lane Zarate from TPW to talk about street maintenance funding and walk us through kind of what they're thinking about for fiscal year 26 planning at this stage.
All right, Mayor and Council, I'm Lauren Prier, Director for Transportation and Public Works, and my co-presenter, Lane Zarate, she is the Assistant Director for Streets and Stormwater Operation. And so last year, we analyzed the street maintenance needs and realized significant life cycle savings when proactive investments are made. Essentially, every dollar invested in maintenance has the potential to generate over 5 times that amount in future savings. So our maintenance investments today will ensure that we leave behind a lasting foundation for future generations. Today, we're going to revisit the progress made in year 1 and introduce a year 2 approach to continue bridging the remaining funding gaps in this category. Lane?
Thank you, Lauren. That was a very good tee-up by Christiane and Lauren. Can y'all see my slides?
There they are.
Okay, so we're just going to get right into it. This map here we showed you last year. This is a map of our Pavement Condition Index, or PCI, for the city. And so these red streets represent a need for reconstruction, but the yellow and gray streets represent a need for maintenance, whether it's preventative, light, or heavy maintenance. And last year, we did a budget scenario forecast that showed if we continued on our trajectory to spend just our current budget plus the 3.5% PAYGO increase each year, that over time the city's street network would continue to deteriorate, and over time we would be adding cost and our backlog would be getting higher and more expensive. And so this is, in short, the problem that we are trying to solve through this initiative. The purpose being that we need to fund street maintenance at a level where we can stop adding costs to our backlog. So this problem is not just felt and seen in the map, it's seen with our residents. This is from the Citizen Survey, and it shows how they ranked street maintenance compared to our other city services. They showed it as the highest importance and lowest satisfaction scoring city service. So this initiative is really a high return on our investment, not only financially, but also for our citizens. So that's really the problem, but what is the solution? This is kind of a high-level overview of the analysis that was done in 2024. The analysis was independently verified by Freese and Nichols, and they came to a very similar gap to us. They are trying to understand and analyze the amount of funding that we need for a network our size. And to do that, what they're doing is figuring out the amount of money that would be necessary for vital segments each year. Vital segments, meaning that they're going to deteriorate into a more expensive procedure the following year. So the big chart here shows the 5-year look ahead for how much funding we need to kind of do those vital to fund projects that are about to get more expensive. However, the 2 most important numbers are summarized at the top. Those are the average maintenance need per year, which is $98 million. And once we take into account the PAYGO budget, that average funding gap is $66.1 million. So those are the target numbers that we're trying to get to through this initiative. And last year, our solution to get there was to provide a funding plan that would incrementally increase our street maintenance funds over time. And for FY25, we had requested an $18.9 million increase. We didn't realize at the time the constraint on the budget last year, and so we were actually very satisfied and happy to receive the $10.4 million towards PAYGO that we received, especially because it saves us about $75 million in future reconstruction costs. So it's a significant step that we took last year. And so this solution to incrementally increase the funding was a journey to arrive to, and so I kind of wanted to give you the history on how we got there. It started in '23 when our internal staff developed our internal tools and the ability to do condition forecasting and budget scenario planning. And in November, we brought in Freese and Nichols to do their independent analysis to figure out what our funding need was. And then they also compared it to the findings from 2010 in the Blue Ribbon Task Force that also identified a street maintenance gap and had recommendations for how to fund those gaps in 2010. So they updated that information, and we presented it to CMO in November and December of '23. And then we followed that up with a work session to council. And at that work session, the solution that we were proposing was for a street maintenance user fee, similar to like a water user fee or stormwater fee, proportional to the use of the system. Ultimately, that was decided to not be the path forward, and we decided to try to incrementally increase the funding through the budget. And so we came back to work session in May and June, and we provided an implementation plan and a funding plan to increase the street maintenance funds over time. And in October, we got our first year increase to street maintenance of $10.4 million. So what did we do with our $10.4 million? We increased our heavy maintenance from 56 lane miles to 89 lane miles. And that additional 33 lane miles is actually equivalent to preventing one minor roadway bond program each year. That minor roadway category of the bond is the appropriate bond category for these end-of-life cycle reconstructions. And so that's why we're comparing it to that. Capital Delivery did a great job stepping up and delivering additional contracts this year. All of these projects that are shown in red are under construction, and actually several of them are complete. So knowing that we can deliver, let's talk about what our options are for FY26. We know that right now we're sitting at a remaining funding gap of about $55.7 million. Now originally, in last year's funding plan, we had proposed to increase the budget $20 million this year. Again, we understand now how constrained our budget will be this year, and that our approach is going to require us to provide y'all some flexible, smaller funding packages. And we're using this a la carte term that Lauren coined because it seems to be really fitting. It's an optional menu to select from based on your budget availability. And another part of our approach this year is that we are going to continue to recommend funding both in the general fund and PAYGO. And in order to explain why, I'm going to use this graphic here on the right. So the green streets, the good condition streets, need preventative maintenance, and this maintenance is a small amount of work, but it's kind of all over the city. And so most of the time, cities don't outsource that because it's not cost effective. So this would be delivered by street operations and paid for through general funds. When the streets deteriorate further and need light maintenance or heavy maintenance, we typically contract that out through PAYGO to contractors because it's localized, it can do traffic control, and that's all paid for by PAYGO. So if we only fund the PAYGO maintenance, the risk that we run is that the good condition streets will deteriorate into that yellow and red category faster, then we can fund the expensive projects out of it. So in that situation, the backlog wouldn't be getting smaller if we have more lane miles deteriorating from good to fair and needing work. So this battle to prevent the deterioration of our network really should be fought on all fronts, keeping the good streets good while we also fund that backlog of maintenance needs. The in-house preventative maintenance is, a lower dollar value, and through investing in that, you also get the added benefit of increasing the longevity of the asset. You can take a 30-year life of a street and turn it into a 40-year life just with a little bit of preventative maintenance. So this is our a la carte menu. These are all optional funding packages that could be funded based on the budget availability this year. And we've kept our color coding from that diagram we just talked about. For PAYGO, we're proposing 2 packages for consideration, and we've set that target level at a total of $10 million. And then we are also proposing a general fund package of $2.9 million. If all of these are selected, it would be $12.9 million in additional street maintenance. Now, I want to stop here and take a second to note that these are recommended funding levels, but all of these budget packages could be sized, increased, or decreased to fit the budget's availability for that purpose.
Lane, question for you. If you go back a slide, and you referred to the savings, the upcoming bond program based on our PAYGO funding appropriated, which was, I think, $75 million roughly. Are you anticipating to have a figure that would be attributable for this fiscal year if we pay PAYGO at that level? Does that make sense in terms of savings of the bond program?
I did update that based on current costs.
Okay.
So for every $1 million that we spend in maintenance right now, based on the cost estimates that the Fort Worth Lab and Capital Delivery are using for the bond programs, every $1 million would save us $7.5 million in future reconstruction costs. With $1 million in maintenance, we can do about 3 lane miles of heavy maintenance. Each mile of bond reconstruction is currently being estimated at $2.75 million for the bond.
Councilmember Beck.
I was waiting for you to get done, but since we're on the topic, so I see that there's about a multiplier of 7 for the dollars that we spend. My question is, does that number hold steady across funding scenarios in the sense of, like, if $1 million gets us 7, a multiplier of 7, is it an order of magnitude? Does $1.5 million get us, a multiplier of 9 or 10, or is it pretty steady? $1 million equals 7, regardless of how you slice it. What I'm trying to get at is, if we add a little more, does that multiplier go up, or does it really matter?
I mean, we'd have to look at that. Obviously, there's a lot of different work types that are being averaged out in that $7 million total, but we could do some more detailed work. I would imagine it wouldn't increase exponentially, but would stay somewhat consistent at that $7 million return.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Flores.
Thank you, Mayor. I have, I think, 3 questions. First, maybe this is to Jay. Have we reconciled how many other prior bond projects that we've approved need to be revisited because of rising construction costs, labor costs, and material costs?
I believe, I'd have to go back and make sure, but I believe we had addressed all those funding gaps with what we brought to you earlier.
Okay, all right. And then this is kind of, I guess, what I would categorize like a service life type of question. Has there been a noticeable rate of increase in the deterioration, wear and tear on major and minor arterials due to more vehicles on the road? I mean, have you seen that? Is that a pretty marked increase compared to, say, the last bond program?
Well, I'm not sure that we could pinpoint that it's down to an increase in vehicles. That's certainly a contributing factor. We have been collecting pavement condition index data since around 2014, and it's gotten more sophisticated each year. With each data point from a condition assessment, we are able to look at how certain environmental factors like the weather, et cetera, impact, the degradation on our roadways compared to national standards. I wouldn't say that we have enough data to really pinpoint that it's an increase in vehicle traffic, but I would certainly assume that is part of it, especially as vehicles are getting heavier with, electrical vehicles. So yes, I would say it's part of it, but I couldn't prove that to you without a doubt.
Thank you, Lauren. And final question. From the à la carte menu, the text.MMA item, I really don't have enough information. I know TxDOT has put a pause on major road projects as far as their construction portfolio is concerned, but can we count on that 4.1 million to come through, or they're putting a pause on that too?
So actually, I was about to go through the slides that give you a lot more explanation about those packages.
Okay, then I'll,
If you'd like to see if your questions get answered,
sure.
okay.
Thanks, Lane.
And just to be clear, this is assuming that we could come up with 13.1 million more in funding in next year's budget than this year. So this would be additive, the assumption that's being made here.
So it'd be $23 million, correct? If we were going from $10 million last year extra.
Right. So from the base that we started with, I believe it was 66, or are we at 66 now? That was a base of 66.
The original funding gap established in 2024 was $66 million. And we've already funded 10 of that. So we're around 55 million left to fund. If we fund the 13 or so million here this year, and are able to fund all of the packages, then we would have funded 10 last year, 13 this year, and we would have funded a total of 23 of the 66 million.
Not cumulative.
It's not correct, yes.
Okay. All right, so let me get into our à la carte menu a little bit more in depth. First, before I present to you our actual PAYGO packages, I want to give you some background. The City of Fort Worth has TxDOT municipal maintenance agreements to maintain certain TxDOT streets that are inside the city limits of Fort Worth. So we currently are responsible for maintaining 27 lane miles that are shown in purple on this map. Now, we haven't historically always prioritized this above our city maintenance. And so we have been in conversations lately about catching up on the maintenance needs for the TxDOT system. And we have estimated the cost to be $16.8 million. This is a large amount, and we're obligated to do this. So we're going to plan to fund it over 4 years, with the first year's worth of projects being estimated at $4.1 million. If we don't get additional funding for this, then we are likely going to have to do it out of our base budget.
So this needs to be done either way, either PAYGO or base budget general fund.
Yes, ma'am.
Conversations with TxDOT is that they would like us to start addressing, meeting our contractual requirements.
Well, I'd love them to meet theirs as well while we're pushing the issue.
Councilmember Beck.
That leads me to my question about this. What benefit does the city get in entering into these MMAs? Because I know we have some others for like the maintenance and upkeep of the lights on the freeways to our enormous expense. So can you tell me why we would enter into this type of agreement?
And as you're answering Councilmember Beck's question, maybe just give the audience an example of what project or what roadway includes an MMA. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I would say, to put this in context, a lot of these agreements were probably entered into before I was born. And so there is definitely some updates that needs to happen with these agreements. Like you said, the street lights. So a lot of people are surprised to know that the city is responsible for the street lighting on TxDOT highways that go through the city of Fort Worth. So the general agreement is they build the roadway, and we'll include that lighting, but we are responsible for maintaining it throughout the city limits. Similar to the streets in the city of Fort Worth, the streets on the TxDOT system, most if not all of them do have a maintenance agreement where at some point the city agreed to maintain these roadways. This has obviously fallen into our backlog, and TxDOT would like to see us start fulfilling our maintenance agreements on these roadways. We do receive a lot of complaints on these. These do typically go through the call center as
To be able to have the ability to do that, they said, we're happy to do what you'd like, but you have to maintain it going forward because it's higher maintenance than they would otherwise have. And so the city agreed to do that.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So, if we do not have to remove some projects and replace them with TxDOT, these are the projects that we would plan for our 26 base budget, which is $38.8 million. It does include the $10.4 million that was provided to us last year. And with that, if we do these projects, we can deliver about 68 lane miles through our maintenance program. For context, 68 lane miles, again, is equivalent to about 2 bond reconstruction categories per year. So there's a huge value in our maintenance program. We're preventing 2 bond programs per year. And so if we can, as another package, we would like to also increase our contract maintenance. So here are the contract packages, 1 and 2. The PAYGO amount we're targeting is $10 million, and for package number 1, the TxDOT MMAs, we would need $4.1 million. That would allow us to not just do the red base projects next year, but to add the purple 9 lane miles on TxDOT system. And then if we are able to fund package number 2, that would be the remaining $5.9 million, and that would go to PAYGO contracts so that we could increase our contract maintenance by 18 lane miles and add the blue streets shown here. The 18 lane miles is equivalent to about half of a bond program, or about $44 million in future reconstruction costs. Okay, so those are the PAYGO packages, and so now I wanted to talk to you about the general fund package, which we're proposing to do in-house. And we would assert that the priority for preventative maintenance is preserving the longevity of our concrete streets. We have, shown in this map, over 2,700 lane miles of concrete streets that are between 80 PCI and 100 PCI. So these streets represent a huge percentage of the value of our street assets. And by investing a small amount of money in preservation, we can save ourselves almost $300,000 a lane mile by not deferring this maintenance. So we're putting together this package for your consideration that would be for a new concrete preservation program. We would do gray crack sealing with 2 teams year-round. That would allow us to touch all of these streets on a 5-year cycle. And in FY26, $1 million. Of that, $500,000 is a one-time cost. So the reoccurring cost is really only $2.4 million, which to preserve and protect this large percentage of the value of our street assets is a very cost-efficient proposition.
Lane, how many people are on each team?
Each team is 5 people.
Thank you. Councilmember Beck.
As I look at this map, and if we go back to the map of the bad streets, right? Because this seems like the not so bad streets. Can you tell me? Go back
To the very front,
that one. All right. So if I look at that map, and then I go and I look at this map with the paving, it looks like we're spending a lot of money in areas that are mild to moderate, but we're excluding, I mean, the inside the loop is not getting a lot. And when you look at that map of where we need the most, where the pavement is at its worst is inside the loop. So why was this prioritized like that?
I'm going to test myself, and then you can slap me if I'm wrong.
I think I know why too.
It's
but-
bond projects, right? These are going to be capital projects that are significant in their phase. So you would use as bond money?
Yes, so a lot of the streets that are really bad inside the loop require bond reconstruction. They're kind of beyond maintenance. So what we're trying to do through increasing our street maintenance funds is keep the good streets and the fair streets from reconstruction, you know? This particular package is, yes, for the good condition streets. These are not even the fair, but this is spending money on the very good condition streets. A small amount of money in comparison to the amount of money it could save us long-term. And it goes back to this diagram here. In order to be cost-effective and really prevent the decline and adding cost over time, we have to keep these green streets, these really good streets, good, while we remove and fund the backlog of projects, because otherwise, more lane miles will fall into the backlog from the green faster than we can fund those expensive maintenance projects out.
We want to keep the blue streets out of future bond programs.
Yes, we have to kind of take on preventative and maintenance.
This might be a question for Lauren also to answer, in y'all's professional opinion, both of you. You know, had the city had a similar mindset in our program for street maintenance over the last 20 years, sounds like we could have prevented sort of the situation, especially in certain council districts like in D9, that's all inside the loop, where you hear a lot of complaints, very well founded, about streets that are completely failed. Maybe that's
Absolutely.
okay.
We are trying to, catch up, but also not dig the hole any deeper. And that is essentially the whole point behind maintenance. We keep saying, keep the good streets good. We have many examples where, we will have 10-year-old concrete streets where we did not do the joint sealant, which could have been a $200,000 project, which will now cost us $4 million to do panel replacement at a 10-year-old street. So there's definitely real cost savings here, and those can be, realized in other portions of our program. Whatever you're saving on maintenance can be put towards more capital projects, right? So it's a system.
Thank you. Councilmember Crane?
Would you say what you just described? I'm just looking here because you've got relatively new developments, Walsh, that are in blue here. You've got relatively new development, Ventana. That's what's happening there, that you have less than 10-year-old streets that are deteriorating?
Likely, I can go look at that. The example I was using was Henrietta Creek. And so there was a $4 million project there last year, was essentially panel replacement, where if we had just done a couple years prior, probably $200,000 worth of joint sealant repair on those concrete panels, we could have avoided that unnecessary reconstruction.
Yeah. And it's your world, it's not mine, but is there something we could do on the front end so you don't have, when these are being developed in the first place, that you can do that on the front end and have the developers help with some of that?
I think this really just comes back to routine maintenance, right?
Okay.
And that we're funding this consistently. And so, when we look at bond programs, these are really seen as infusions into the system. But what's also important is to have a consistent and reliable funding source for that maintenance.
Council, I'm going to speed us along, or make Lane speed us along, pun intended, because I know we need to get to the second section of this and end by 4. Thank you.
Well, I'm almost to the end. So to summarize all of our a la carte funding packages, we are showing you now a modified funding plan. This modified funding plan achieves funding our gap in 5 years with a 4% inflation. It includes funding for the TxDOT maintenance needs, the city contract maintenance, and our preventative maintenance. So the yellow column are the a la carte packages and the recommended amounts. But again, those amounts for each of those packages can be tailored to the leadership's decisions. If all of these packages are funded, then it would be a $12.9 million increase for street maintenance this year. If we add that to the funded gap from last year, we would be at 23.3 million this year. So I will take questions, but I just want to say real quick, thank you from our staff, because it's very exciting to see what the city leadership is doing, really helping to make substantial progress towards investing in our street maintenance. And so we really, really appreciate you.
We appreciate you too, Lane. Thank you both. Okay, council, I will turn it back over to Jay for our next presentation.
So we're going to be moving forward or going into the general fund forecast. And I believe Brady will be doing this presentation with a little intro from Christiane.
Me again, yes. I'm going to take a teeny tiny point of privilege for an announcement, since we usually do these in work session, but since we're together today, and since you're going to hear from Brady, I wanted to announce that Brady recently got promoted in the Fort Worth lab. So Brady is now one of our assistant directors. He's going to be leading a reorganized division that's over revenue and special districts. This was a competitive search, external, internal, but he really stood out for his technical proficiency and dynamic communication, which you guys have seen a lot of over the last year. I know you've enjoyed interacting with Brady. We're really proud of him. Just so you know, Brady has, because you don't know all this about him, but he has a bachelor's from OU. You see his cup that he always carries from, so we forgive him for that. But his MBA is from TCU. They're both heavily focused in finance and economics, and we're really lucky to have him. He has great public and private sector experience. So just want to congratulate Brady before you hear from him today.
Congratulations, Brady.
Thank you very much. I would just say how very grateful I am for the years I've had working for the city, the current position, but all the work I've done. And the best part about that has always just been the people that I've been able to become friends with and work with to do that kind of work, including everybody in this room. Thank you. Now, during Lane's presentation, the mayor made a comment and said, "You can slap me if I'm wrong." So I'm going to say, I'm here to tell you about the April value estimates, and you can slap me if I'm right. So we showed you a forecast 2 weeks ago, and this is how we were shaping up in the general fund. So we were looking at about 3.5% property tax revenue growth, and that put us at a $2.7 million deficit based on the expenses and the kind of current budget we were working with. And this was just the day before we got the April value estimates when we last came to you with this. Before I even dive into what the values are, I'll just give a reminder what happens throughout the year. So we get these estimated values in April. Then throughout the next few months, people have gotten their value notice from the appraisal district. They have the chance to protest that and maybe get their value lowered. And so when we get the final values in July, they typically are not as high as what we see in April. So even though right now you're seeing some values, it's probably going to be a little bit lower than this when we get the final ones in July and then we start setting our budget. So what we're looking at right now is 8.6% growth over what our values were last July. When we did the same thing last year, the growth from July of 2023 to April of 2024 was closer to 12% growth. So even over a comparable period, we're not seeing as much coming up from last year. Now we have high growth, as is typical in Denton and Parker, even though the mix is a little bit interesting, especially in Denton, between the new construction and the existing growth. Overall, I'd say myself, I was hoping for a little bit more in the new construction than just over 2%. So maybe over the next few months we could capture a little bit more of that, but I wouldn't necessarily count on it. And so the rest of the 8.6% just comes from properties that were on the roll last year that have appreciated in value, but even though that is 6.4% now, one thing you might remember about the voter approval rate is that you can only capture 3.5% of growth on existing properties. So if in some strange situation these values stayed the same, we wouldn't be able to get all that revenue. And then we have more than just our current property tax collections within our budget, and that's the vast vast majority, but there's some other lines in there, and based on what we talked about 2 weeks ago with our current year forecast and some of the mid-year value loss that we're seeing due to litigation, we're going to adjust those two lines. So the delinquent property tax collections budget, we're going to take that down by $1 million, down to 1.75 million. But we are at least going to offset that because the penalty and interest has been climbing pretty high the past few years, and we think we can take that up by $500,000. So the net effect is a decrease, but not too big of a one. The bigger impact, however, is that we're going to change our collection assumption, which for several years has been that we think we're going to get 98.5% of what's on the roll. And so to really take account of that mid-year value loss due to the litigation, we're going to take that down to 98%. So within the general fund, that 0.5% decrease should be around $3.5 million in revenue that we'll lose.
So did y'all understand that? Basically, there's more in protest, so people aren't paying throughout the year. They get settled later, but they don't happen the actual fiscal year that we're involved in. So
That's right. So here is the revenue that we would get on the current values, and then the revenue that we're forecasting that we would get by July after those protests have been settled and it's fallen off somewhat. So we'll use the term erosion sometimes. So if I say erosion, I just mean value loss to mostly protests, but it could be new exemption applications, anything that causes those values to fall. And what this forecast amounts to is that we think about 5.5% is going to come off as value loss between now and July. And that would put us below the forecast we showed you before, about $12.5 million lower. Now we'll say we looked at all the different categories and different appraisal districts, and so within the current values that we're getting and what we're forecasting, the reappraisal plan is causing us to not see as much growth as we would hope. So we're not, I wouldn't say we're really outperforming by any real means, but where we're coming in lower than our expectation is a lot more on the commercial side, both in terms of where we think those existing values are going to end up, and also that we just don't seem to be seeing that much new commercial construction this year.
Brady, I have a question on that. And if you don't have information, you can get it to me later. But just thinking about the evaluations and where they're projected to be in July, what's the breakdown between commercial and residential valuations and existing values?
And just the total they make up of the tax base?
Percentage, yeah, of that valuation that you were presenting on.
It should be around 65% commercial and 35% residential.
Is it the other way around? Is it the other way around, 65 residential?
It is, I don't have the exact number, but it's roughly a third, just over a third. It is the other way around. Roughly a third is commercial, and then close to 2/3 is residential.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. You're right, it should be the other. That'd be great if it was.
That's what we're all working for,
Yeah,
right?
it should be, so maybe next year.
There's a whole lot else to say about the residential. You know, I personally received my tax bill this month, and it's gone up 40%. Since I first bought the house with my family, and my dad lives with us. And so I know working families all across the city are struggling with the property tax statement. That's, you know, several $100s for me a month. And that's a big difference, especially with a father with 2 kids taking care of my dad as well, right? So I asked that just to kind of gauge where we are and to know that this is a very real issue that's hitting working families every day.
Well, and you got to remember that everybody's seen their values go up in their existing homes, but on those, the valuations on the actual revenue the city can bring in, we're capped at 3.5%. So on the city side, that's why we've either had a flat tax rate or lowered the tax rate because of the increase in those values. And so those percentages can look huge, but the actual income that actually comes to the city at 3.5% doesn't even keep up with inflation of 4%. So just as a reminder.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that's also an important discussion for us to take to our residents too, Jay, just knowing that obviously we're doing the best that we can as a city through homestead exemptions, through being good stewards of the tax rate. And yet the valuation is still real and out of our control, and people are still paying that tax bill every day. So although we are certainly doing our job, I think there's a broader conversation here with the state just about the impacts of valuations on everyday hardworking people who are having a hard time making the budget pencil at the table, the kitchen table.
Well, I agree. It's a big expense. It's not a small portion of anybody's household budget. So we take that seriously, and that's always a big part of the conversation is what's that going to translate to in the tax bill. And in July, we'll probably look at what a typical tax bill would be because the appraisal districts always report on what a typical home value is. So great point. With that in mind, and these revenue figures and that forecast for July, we've got an updated version of that long-term forecast that we started out this presentation with. So we were looking at about 2.7 million revenues below expenditures in the forecast when we came to you last time. So now with this taken in, we're looking at, in July, we expect about a $15.2 million shortfall. So we know the budget is going to be balanced when all is shaken out, but that speaks to the kind of action that we're going to have to take to get to that balanced budget. And then there are a couple pieces of state legislation where there's many pieces of legislation we're following, but a couple that are right on the cusp, I think, of becoming law. One that would affect us this year and one that would not. So the first one, thankfully, this is the bigger impact, but it looks like it would not take effect until tax year 26, which is the fiscal year 2027 budget. But this is HJR 1, which is a substitute of a previous bill. So this would take business personal property, which could be something like equipment, vehicles on the lot, inventory that businesses have, which is taxable as property. Right now, the exemption on that is $2,500, which is mostly to save time for people that have businesses that have next to nothing, so it's not taxable. But this would increase that exemption 50 times upward to $125,000. And it's at least better than a previous one, which would have been $250,000, and that would have taken effect this year. So we're expecting that to probably be law next year and impact our FY27 budget, and probably take off about 1% or $6.25 million from our property tax revenue. Then the other, which is Senate Bill 1008, the bad thing is that it looks like it would affect FY26, but it's at least a smaller impact. So this, and I'm not an expert on it, it was just brought to my attention last Friday, but this would affect our Environmental Services Department within the general fund, and this would impose statewide restrictions on their fees so that they couldn't exceed something similar that the state charged. And the staff within Environmental Services is doing as much as they can within the law to minimize the impact of this, but the estimate is that this would take off about $1.5 million in revenue for the upcoming fiscal year.
Mayor, may I ask a question?
Yes, Councilmember Flores.
On that bill summary, where you say that it's, well, would it impact on-site inspections from a staff standpoint?
I can't say. If there's anybody from Environmental Services, they might know. We can get back to you if not.
Here comes Cody.
I don't know if I'm making a correct conclusion, Cody. What I'm asking again is the implications of SB 1008. Would that impact what you can do in a staff level to do on-site inspections?
So Cody Wittenberg, Environmental Services, happy to take that question. We're currently looking at our revenue structures for FY26, and we're looking at those different fees and what those models look like. At this point, we hope that there would be no impact if we're able to make some fee adjustments as a part of the FY26 budget package. But if we had to assume this hit, we might have to reevaluate our staff and reconsider our service levels. Absolutely.
Councilman, it'll be all, whether or not we would choose to fund those existing positions, they would just need to be gap filling of the 1.5 that's gone. So it could be general fund dollars. You could say, we're not getting those dollars anymore. We're no longer going to do it, but it might create some health safety issues in restaurants by the inspections that are done. So that's a real world impact that we would have to deal with.
Got it. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Cody.
Cody Wittenberg, fellow Oklahoma Sooner.
It's a bold statement.
That's right. So with those two bills taken into account within the forecast, then this is what we would be looking at. So a slightly deeper hole for FY26, going up to 16.7 million. But the bigger impact being in FY27, because then we're taking the growth down by a full percentage point on the property tax side. And then once we'd balanced FY26, it would be not another 36.5, but probably another 20 million we would need to adjust to balance FY27. So I wish we had all the answers and all the certainty today, but these are some of the times throughout the year. I think you saw this schedule before, but when information is going to keep coming in, and if I could add on there the absolute final day when we knew all the bills from the legislative session, I'd put that on there as well, because that'll play a big part in this.
Thank you, Brady.
Thank you.
Questions from council for Brady or for Jay? Jay, what's our next scheduled meeting? Go ahead, Councilman Nettles.
I don't know if it's a question or a future agenda item. I was online when they talked about the street maintenance, and she alluded to bringing that proposal of a street fee or a user fee. And I know this council was against that 2 years ago. But I didn't see in this project today, what does that look like if we did do that, what amount, and how much dollars would they put towards our budget?
Well, I think for clarity, it wasn't a part of the presentation today. It was just more of a mention that had been something was looked at in 2010, then resurfaced last year, that we, the consensus of the body was it wasn't the right time. But if you want it as a future agenda item, I'm sure that Lauren and her team could bring forward what that presentation looked like and what the fee structure proposed at the time was by Councilmember Beck.
I was actually holding this until next work session, but I would like a future agenda item, just to set out really the scenario for all of us and the residents. So if we were going to fund that street maintenance gap out of our property taxes, what does that do to our rate? Is it 2 cents? Is it 10 cents? And
Versus funding it out of a fee structure.
correct. So that way we have some, what I would like is options, not just this is the amount, but this is the proposed fee. This is what it would look like out of property taxes. This is what it would look like out of a hybrid, so that we can better have that conversation and a more robust conversation between us and the public.
We can do that. So we do have the next budget discussions June 3rd, and then another on the 17th. But we could probably put all that together and have it by the June 17th. I think we also have a longer session set out, so we'd have the time to have that discussion.
If I may build on that too, I know the Fort Worth Lab is really good at cutting data all kinds of ways. It would be helpful to have the impact on neighbors by a monthly basis. Brady, if you can do that. That way we see the impact month to month on neighbors. I've always been hesitant on fees because working class families barely have enough extra dollars for what they're already paying for. So any additional fees, I would like that broken down in a monthly basis. That way we can understand the impact on everyday working people.
Any other questions from council or future agenda items? Okay, with that, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all.